while Sue started in had the role at Unilever in a communications capacity, it doesn't really address the whole background behind a sort of much wider influence at DWP across how much change was going on in that environment, and where marketing was also a key hinterland sort of career. And the previous speakers talking about, with Ian saying, where do careers come from and who is going to be good at this going forward, I think what Sue will tell us shortly about her impact at Unilever relied on very many different experiences to be so influential at Unilever. And then I think for the context of this room, where communications evolved for Sue was being the EVP of Sustainable Development and playing a core role in this whole story around sustainability, transformation and purpose. So before we kick off on you and Unilever, just any thoughts on the previous speakers? We've got happy clappy videos on one side. Tell me, what are your thoughts on some of the speakers?
Well, I agree very strongly with some and very strongly not with others, and I won't go into the details of that now, or I might get chucked off the stage. There was something actually that Matt said. In fact, he slightly stole my line. But, you know, today we're talking mainly about purpose. I actually want to get onto the sustainability bit because I think that's much more existential and much more concrete. But I worry quite a lot about purpose. In fact, we've had the whole stuff around fake news and we're dealing with the consequences of that daily. I think we are now charging towards a kind of a fake purpose era if we're not really careful. And I think that is incredibly damaging. So I think we see a huge rush for the right motives and the right reasons in Blueprint. And now I'm resting. I have a lot more time to devote to Blueprint, which is fantastic. And we've engaged with over 60 companies in the FTSE 350 who are genuinely wanting to go on that journey. But for every one of those 60, there are scores that you can mention that are doing it really as a piece of very superficial branding. And the point really is that if purpose is going to drive your business to be more successful, you can't just treat it like a lipstick. You have to think deeply about how it becomes embedded in your DNA. And I can talk a little bit more about what the drivers for success are, but fundamentally, if it isn't driving your business decisions and your choices, and people who are 7 or 8 times removed from your CEO can't innately understand what kinds of decisions and behaviors they need to make, then your purpose is not really driving the business in a constructive way. So I think that was the first context point I wanted to make. I think the other, and by the way, individual organisations will get found out for that, and I don't think it's any coincidence that the biggest rush, I see this as a lead indicator of the problem, is that the main service providers at the moment for companies on developing a purpose are branding agencies. I love branding agencies, that's not a criticism of them, but it is a lead indicator of what the market thinks it wants to buy. And if that's the trend, that's a worrying trend. Much more profoundly, though, we have just had the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who announced just 3 weeks ago that we basically, and I know the guy who wrote Marvel Comics has just died, but really, seriously, I wish he hadn't, because if we can find some way of getting people to engage with this, it would be good. We basically have 10 years to save the planet. Now, any of you sitting here from a business who were told you've got 10 years, quite possibly a lot less than that, for your business to survive, you'd leave this room, you'd call a serious away day, and you'd start thinking in a very different way. And I think what's fascinating is that at the moment we are still slightly in that denial piece, just as we were slightly when the Germans marched into Poland. So what tips companies into acting? Because this is probably the biggest known threat that our organisations actually face. And I hope what you can do is grill me a bit on how you make an opportunity from that, but also what the consequences of inaction are.
And I think if you think of your journey when you arrived and maybe the mandate that you thought you had at the beginning and how quickly that changed, I know that when part of it was how to take all of the ideas of a sustainable business and Paul as chief executive thinking very widely around how that might look and you talked about crystallizing. How do you make that real and achievable, and how do you set goals that can be measured, and all of that piece? So with that sort of conversion of a CEO's idea, and I hear it all the time, it's literally almost been dreamt up at night, and I've had corporate affairs directors say it was a whimsical idea. How do you make that tangible and real, and how do you make it embedded through the employee piece, but also the external stakeholders? You know, that purpose journey, how did it shape the way the company was run?
Yeah. So a purpose on its own is only ever a starting point. It's essential, but it's absolutely not sufficient. What you need to make purpose work is you need the granular plan below it that says, and as a result of this, these are things that we will not do. These are things that we will carry on doing. It's basically your stop, start, continue list. And at Unilever, it took the form of the USLP, as it very quickly became abbreviated, because it's a right mouthful, the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. And that was basically our detailed route map for how we were going to live our purpose. And because it was public, it was granular, it was scary as hell. So we launched a set of goals, and we said at the time, we actually didn't know how we were going to achieve them. So very different from the way that you do traditional business planning, and in a way quite high risk. But the power was in being very visible, very public, and hugely honest about the fact that we didn't know just how we were going to achieve it. The weakness, I would say, and it's something that we addressed iteratively over time, was we were very clear about how you link purpose with how you execute it through the sustainability plan, but we didn't crack the third leg on the stool, which is how it was linked to the business plan. And for 5 years, they ran completely in parallel, and that was really very challenging.
And I think that point then, of when just thinking, rushing ahead, but going back, just remind yourself, as a sort of war room scenario, or the multiple stakeholders that you had to coalesce, and your role in that, and the wider sort of mission. You have a CEO mandate. How do you make that come really real? I mean, really get ExCo members interested. It's not the lipstick, it is integral to, that journey.
Yeah.
Where was your point of influence? Where were the challenges that you had to overcome on that?
Yeah. So interestingly, this is where sustainability and communications meet in the middle. Because what you have to do when you're looking at how you embed sustainability in the business is you have to get over we all know it's the right thing to do, but frankly, I have got short-term delivery targets and the survival of the business, we're invested in by pension funds. You know, these are not frivolous points. What that means you need a very clear business case. And so on one side of my team, we did a lot of work on what the business case was. And two things, please steal with pride, because this is incredibly simple, but I think we probably coined it, was to say anything you do under the badge of sustainability has to drive growth, mitigate risk, reduce cost, or build trust. If it doesn't do one or more of those four, we're not going to do it. Now, as soon as you started to put sustainability into the traditional language and the DNA of the business lent in and went, that's okay, I get that stuff. I may not be a practitioner in some of the newer emerging elements of sustainability per se, but I can now understand how I make decisions around that. So that was the core piece. And of course, that's the left side of the brain. But then you also need to engage the right side of the brain, and almost more importantly, the heart. And somebody's already, I think it was Matt, talked about the bubble that we live in. How many people have been to a waste incineration plant, or been to a favela, or seen any of the plastics emerging out of an Indonesian river in the last 6 months in this room? 3. Well, congratulations to the 3 of you. And I can assure you that it's a blessed relief to the rest of you that you haven't. But you understand the point that I'm making, that if you really want to drive change, you have to be the change you want to see. And to do that, you have to associate with it very deeply at a personal level. Now, because of its history, Unilever happens to have quite a lot of people that are kind of made that way already. But large swathes, particularly at a more senior level of our leaders, simply didn't have direct engagement or connection with huge issues, which, by the way, a lot of our brands were seeking to solve. So, you know, the learnings are very simple. Couch this in the language of business and make clear what the benefits and the risks are, particularly the growth driver, and I can tell you what the growth driver was if you're interested in that for Unilever. And crucially, understand really on the ground what the human impact is of the communities right through the value chain of you doing business, and think deeply about how you can improve that in a way that's better for your business. And one crucial point is, there's this trap that people tend to fall into all the time. I was tutoring on a course for 4 days with business leaders at Cambridge University just last week. And everybody comes to this with the same mentality, which is, do we do the right thing or do we grow? Yeah. And as soon as you get into that binary mindset, you go down a bunny hole that's very difficult to get out of. The thing here is to say, how can we do the right thing in a way that makes us a stronger business, that grows more, that attracts people more, so that we're here for the long term. And that's hard, right? All these are big, hairy problems that are hard, but that's the mentality.
And did you take, I mean, in terms of running either pilots or working out how things were going to come real and do little baby steps rather than try and solve the whole world, what was the approach to the making it come real so you had something to say, and the decision to then communicate it? Because that's the other catch-22, is you hear clients sort of saying, well, we don't want to go live on all this yet because we haven't got the results to show it. And you were just saying, actually, we didn't know what the results would be, and we'd have to be very transparent about that. So were there baby steps and pilots, and also was there a risk of the management team losing their nerve, that it was going to take too long?
All of that, yes. So the answer is there's no neat way to do this. You just have to dive in and start experimenting in some areas. If you work in a big branded consumer business, the most fundamental thing you have to do is you have to understand where you can connect with your consumers. And actually, Kevin helped us do that. I'll talk briefly about that, although I may be about to run out of time. But we also flipped the company normal narrative on its head. So instead of saying, this is going to be perfectly baked before we talk about this, and we're going to manage our risk down by being super conservative, we went in completely the opposite direction. And we said, because we don't know how to do this, we're going to go out there and ask for help. We're going to explain our failures and our challenges. We're going to be incredibly honest about that. And by the way, in a lot of the things we want to change, we can't do this on our own. So you'll all have seen probably the little beautiful, originally Greenpeace, now Iceland ad that's gone viral, Rangtan. So that's all about palm oil. We decided that we wanted to get into pure sustainable palm oil, which doesn't kill orangutans and doesn't kill peat forests and all the other things. Deforestation, in case anybody doesn't know, is 25% of all carbon dioxide. It's a massive problem. We decided that 10 years ago. We're the biggest buyer, but we're still only 5% of the market. So we had to get other people to come in behind us. We had to get the whole system to change. And you only do that if you take a campaigning approach and a radical collaboration.
And I think, interestingly, to Ian's point about where a leader's going to come from, and I alluded to your background being quite varied as well, and when we spoke not that long ago, that the skill of understanding some of that marketing, not about branding and repurposing under a marketing hat, but making it integral and honest. If you think about your skills and being a bit more personal about you, the skills that you most had to rely on and the hinterland that then equipped you to do this unique moment in time, unique opportunity, untrodden road that you've really helped clear the path for so many organisations. What were the 2 or 3 things that you think held most useful to you from your past to the last 7 intense years?
Yeah. Understanding how you do behaviour change is one. So in government, you do a lot of mass behaviour change, whether it's stopping smoking or speeding or, I was at DWP getting people into work in a recession, getting them to save for later life. Someone's already referred to that. So what does it take, actually, to get massive shifts? Ironically, what it takes is Blue Planet. Who'd like to be in the plastic straws business right now? But ordinarily, it's very complex and very slow. And understanding what that contract is with consumers. So the second bit for me that has been invaluable is actually having worked in marketing and advertising. And I have to say, Howell is here, who hired me into DWP, and working at the top of government and understanding actually how really big decisions get made. I mean, government is all about stakeholdering, right? You can't achieve anything until you get more people supporting you as not, as Mrs. May is finding out right now. And really understanding how you get decisions made in any big system. So not just in the narrow function of your part of the organisation, or even just in your organisation, but stepping right out of that and understanding how you can change a whole system and what your role is in that, and how you get to a tipping point so that markets shift, so you can actually be at the forefront of that, be competitive, but actually be collaborative at the same time. So all those seemingly conflicting things that you have to do now in today's business, and be prepared for anything, whatever the next plastic straws is basically the challenge.
Yeah, I think, and I would just add that piece around the commercial lens, so that people are really thinking about the corporate strategy, because I think the risk of the happy clappy bit is that it just is too much of a light touch. And when we're talking to senior leaders all the time who are absolutely obsessed about this subject, I can tell you the amount of CEOs who are saying they're trying to get to grips with how you combine purpose, what was CSR, philanthropy, CSR, sustainability, or social value, corporate social value, where does that sit, and how do you engage with your employee piece? The skill set of these roles, it's just, we've been really looking into this, is so interesting around being commercially minded and having the human touch and having the EQ. So sort of that intellectual agility, but an enabling role. So you brought together all sorts of different functions, divisions, brands who could have quite happily worked in their own space. So I would sort of mention that anyone embarking on this journey, that really key piece of bringing together all the pieces and being a really a proactive engager for your organisation, and you've done that beautifully. I think Sandra's going to touch up in a minute. So, and in terms of more widely, just those critical, those partners that you had, where do you see this whole thing around sustainability, transformation, and putting in their purpose? Who are the key partners for you on your peer group across marketing, finance? You have to, I guess, work closely with you. How many combinations were needed to get this thing off the ground?
Oh, multiple. But given that I'm about to be hustled off the stage, I think the most profound point is that this is probably the most difficult change that businesses are going to have to make, probably in my lifetime. I mean, it makes digital look relatively simple, for example. But if you think that if most of the major companies that in this room don't become carbon neutral in the next 10 years, we're probably not going to exist with the economy in any state as it is now. So my provocation, I think, and part of the reason I was interested to come today is just to get your head around the immediacy of that. We are basically facing an emergency, right? And the next 10 years are going to be the most messy, I think, that we've seen for a very long time. And very large numbers of companies are not going to make it. So we've talked about transformation a bit. But the reality is big businesses are not good at changing their spots. You know, you have to challenge your own model of short-term value creation in order to do that. You have to fundamentally challenge your own belief set. So think, my call to action for everybody is really to get your minds around that. Think about how you can be a leader in it and get opportunity from it, because you very definitely can. I don't see this as bleak for individual organisations, but I do see it as something that is going to create levels of chaos we haven't even begun to see yet. You know, this year it's been moving people from, oh, I wish people could use a bit less plastic, to, I don't want to buy any plastic. You know, if you're in the plastics industry now, you're having hell. And next year it could be meat, because consumption of meat is also going to wreck the planet. And we just don't, nobody knows the point at which we will now have touch points. But what we do know is we've got a global population who are acting with their feet and with their wallets in a way that they never have. So you're either looking ahead and taking forecasting risks, or you're sitting tight, and that's not a good place to be. So obviously I advocate the former.
Marvellous. Okay, on that fantastic note, I think the sort of passion that you speak, and actually being now out of Unilever and the chance to work for the Blueprint organisation and out there campaigning and feeling very strong about social cause. Hopefully people in the audience will be able to chat to you a bit later and
Sure.
see what you think. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
So much content. Thank you so much.